Hey y'all, welcome to the Team LocoFit Roundtable, hosted by me, Laurin Conlon, owner of Team LocoFit. Each week, I am joined by one of our coaches to dive headfirst into the nutrition, training, mindset, and coaching strategies we use with our clients. If you loved the show, please subscribe, leave us a review, tell a friend, you know the drill. And for more information about coaching, the programs we offer, and additional content, visit teamlocofit.com.
Pow pow.
All right. Is that our opening?
I guess so.
Pow.
I was going to start it off with
Pew,
my
pew.
routine, but...
Okay.
Pew pew.
All right, guys. Well, hey, we're here, and guess who I'm with?
Me!
I'm with Coach Jill, who clearly is not doing too hot today.
I just took a couple Advil.
Pop some Advil. She's
feeling like a brand new woman.
ready to go.
Yes.
And this podcast is actually... It's something that I've been wanting to do for a little while. I actually made an IGTV about this last week, but I know that a podcast format will be even better.
Yeah.
And on top of the topic, I did want to kind of loop in some questions that I presented, or a question box, and then I got presented with these questions that I think kind of illustrate this more. And it's the idea that diets don't work. And this has become a more pervasive theme in the industry as of late. Intentional weight loss doesn't work, diets don't work, calorie deficits, however you want to label it. The idea is diets don't work. And what people are generally referring back to here is that they're looking at some research, or really a lot of research, where it shows that most people regain the weight that they lose. And we see this everywhere. We know people who do this. We maybe have done it ourselves. Yo-yo dieting is clearly a real thing. But the idea that intentional weight loss or diets do not work is a faulty concept. And I challenge that with, it's not necessarily only the diet, it's what are you doing before, what are you doing during, and what are you doing after, and what are your behaviors around that. And if you're telling somebody that a diet doesn't work, you're literally creating a victim narrative for them to never be successful and never change anything.
Yeah, and never even try.
Exactly. Why would you try if all you're hearing these messages, it doesn't work?
Doesn't work. And that's taking a select few people, or a majority of people right now, who are caught in that yo-yo dieting cycle, and that it's lumping them into this category where it's like, oh, this is evidence that these things just don't work at all. When we have clear evidence that, there are successful dieting methods. It's just how you go about it and what you do afterwards.
So first, if we're going to just take like the scientific look at it, as far as the way that research is conducted, it's really hard to do the types of research that most people who are listening to this podcast, or most people just in general, want. Everybody has these idealized versions of scientists and research labs and all this stuff, right? Like, why don't they just ask this question, or why don't they just do this study?
It's not that.
It's like, oh, well, if you've ever been in a lab, you'll understand why.
Yeah, it's like if we're taking like cancer research, and then we're taking, let's
diet people research.
Let's play around with flexible dieting or dieting methods. Like, there's obviously one that funds are going to go towards more.
Yes. So number one, always with research, is funding. Whether the funding goes to new lab equipment, whether the funding goes to students, meaning not like the students are getting paid, but as far as like PhD programs, which is where most research is done, they have to fund the students. Funding participants. Just everything involved requires money. And this is not that the scientists are bought out or anything like this. This is literally just funding to run things. So first is funding. And then second is the way that research is run, and the way that we have to look at like timetables and semesters and all of this stuff. It's, even just take yourself, right? Even myself, either of us. I love science. I love research. Somebody said, hey, I got to follow you for 5 years. Can you keep coming back to my lab? I'd be like, I'd have to be really invested in the project, right? Dr. Campbell asked me to do that? Sure. Yeah. I got it. Some other person, I don't really know. Why would I do, I'm not really invested in it. So when people want to do research that is not only, inclusive to a bunch of different types of people and a bunch of different body types and a bunch of different like niches of people in a really long timeline, it's literally damn near impossible to get people to come in for a fucking 8-week study, let alone what we need to do to actually look at people, which is years and years and years.
Yeah, working in the lab, just seeing the amount of people who drop out of the study, like within the first few weeks, it's crazy.
It's insane.
And to ask of that for people, to ask that people to do that for 5 years, English. Oh you can imagine how hard that is.
So when you look at this long-term research, you're typically looking at stuff where they say, hey, can you come in, we're going to track you for these 5 years. It doesn't mean you're doing an intervention. It means that they're asking questions, right? So they don't really have control over what you're doing. They don't really know what you're doing. First of all, our memory is awful. Most people's recall memory is really not that great. So you could say, yeah, this is what I did, but really, do we actually know? Really? The best research, the most accurate research is, you're living in the lab, you're doing all this stuff, you're coming in every day. Again, not feasible, right? So it's like, sure, we can get long-term research done, but we're not really going to have an intervention. It's literally just going to be tracking people. So that's where a lot of the issues come in with research, just from a funding perspective and a realistic perspective. And not even just that, you have to have an advisor or a professor leading the lab who really cares about that question too, right? Like one question we got to answer for, all these years, right? And now people obviously dedicate their lives to answering specific questions in a lab. But at some point, there's all these things, and especially if you are in a, kind of tied to the university, you're going to be dealing with semesters. And then not only are a lot of the subjects who are likely going to be student population going to be leaving, the people who are running your lab might be leaving too, right? So there's just like all these
restraints and
there's all these things, and that's why there's this idealized version of like, oh, I would just love to follow people after a diet for all these years. Yeah, me too. I would love to do that too. And I would love to follow bodybuilders for 3 years to see what happens. But guess what? It's nearly impossible to do that. So what we have to do is look at science in a way and say, okay, what does the literature say? And then we need to formulate plans around that as practitioners, right? So as coaches, as people in the industry. And what's really frustrating with this message that's being pushed that, oh, diets don't work, it's, maybe this crash diet, and a lot of people who are doing diet research also, we have to remember this, they're in the obese population, right?
The majority of it.
They are allowed and supervised to do these very low calorie diets, which is VLCD, K. Hey, I got it, guys. I got the acronym. So if you ever see that VLCD, that means very low calorie diet, which is typically 800 calories.
Yeah, or less.
Or less. I think there has to be a bottom range.
Yeah, that has to be. But I'm pretty sure, 800 calorie is like the max.
Yes, that cutoff. So a lot of times they're doing liquid shakes. They're doing things that are easy again to monitor, and they're doing these 12-week diets. People who are overweight and need to lose weight. Okay. Guess what? Those people are definitely going to gain weight back. You know what I mean? Like, we have to look at the methods. It's not that weight loss didn't work. It's like, well, did we teach these people anything? Do they have the right habits? What were they doing before? What were they doing after? So that's what's so frustrating to me when this narrative is being pushed that diets don't work.
It's like, okay, let's look at the rest of, what's happening here, which they're not taking into consideration.
No. Particularly the habits, which is what we as a team have become so entrenched in and teaching our clients this, because this is the missing piece. As soon as I realized as a coach that it wasn't necessarily like the plan or the macro split or the this. Now, is that important? Yes. But
a lot goes into getting to that point to begin with.
And you can't even get there if you don't have those habits.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. There's so many moving parts. I can give someone, hey, just follow this diet, follow these cardio recommendations, but if they're not actually following, a consistent routine, if they're not set in their foundational habits with, actually being able to follow through with these things, all that doesn't matter.
No, it looks great on paper.
Yeah.
But how do we execute on that? And if you're telling somebody, what's really great about strict diets, which is why a lot of people do them, is because it completely eliminates all the other noise. You say, hey, this is what you're allowed to eat, this is what you can't eat. Put
your blinders on and, you follow this plan, that's great.
Cool.
But what about afterwards? What about all these other scenarios that can come up? Oh, you have a wedding, like, are you just gonna, follow your point system or whatever it is that this diet prescribes? Or, oh, you fall off your plan and then you fall backwards.
Which is generally what happens, which is generally why we see yo-yo dieting. And one of the reasons that yo-yo dieting is so, well, let's just define that. It's basically just, going through periods of calorie deficits and then so you're in a deficit and then you come out of it, and then you're in a deficit and you come out of it, and typically you're weight cycling along with this kind of yo-yo pattern.
And a lot of this is because these quick fix diets, these fad diets, you'll see, I can go on it and list a bunch of them, but I'm sure we're all familiar. They allow you to, hey, we lost weight fast, but it doesn't teach you anything about how to sustain that long term, and it doesn't teach you anything about the behavior changes that you need to make. You're following a quick plan, and it's easy, it's mindless, you have something to follow, but it doesn't teach you anything about sustaining it long term and how to apply that to your life after the diet.
Which is absolutely critical. So to get a little nerdy about weight cycling also, so there are metabolic adaptations that we've talked about many times in the podcast, and the quicker that you lose weight and the more muscle mass that you lose is actually what is indicative of these adaptations. Now, regardless of how great you diet, if you get lean enough, you're going to deal with metabolic adaptations. It is just a process of a calorie deficit. You cannot avoid it. But one of the fastest ways to have more adaptations is to lose a lot of muscle mass. Yeah. And as I talked about with Dr. Lyon on that podcast series I did with her, most people are not only have too much body fat, they have too little muscle. And every time you diet, you lose muscle. It is very hard to keep muscle while you're dieting. You can, if you're not resistance training and eating enough protein, you're not going to maintain muscle mass when you diet. And most people are not doing that because, again, they're not focusing on that. They're looking at I need to do this very low calorie diet. Or again, if we're looking at the literature, weight loss doesn't work. They're going to lose this weight, but they're going to gain it back. Why? Because they had these 800 calorie shakes and they had a plan laid out for them. Yeah. And now they don't know what to do afterwards. So that is what is so frustrating about hearing this type of pushback. It's like, no, that's not what, you're looking at it in the wrong context. And the context needs to be not that diets don't work, it's that why
didn't this work for you?
What weren't you doing? How do you need to look at it? How do you need to look at your habits? Because these things are not accidents, you know what I mean? And so it's absolutely mind-blowing that people can get this twisted. And I understand, again, if you're not in the scientific literature with this, if you're not coaching people, if you're just seeing all these mixed messages, I get how it can be confusing. But we needed to do better and educate people on this, because this is not going anywhere. Bad dieting habits and people being in bad metabolic shape is not going anywhere unless we actually teach people. Yeah, and you know what? You don't necessarily have to be well versed in the literature to kind of get this point either.
No. I think a large portion of people who feel like diets don't work, and this is just, if you're dieting, you're just doing all these negative things, and you're going to have negative body image, and you're restricted, and all this other stuff. I think that's more of an issue with the individual too, in that, hey, let's look at your mindset towards the dieting approach first. How is your relationship with food? Is that stuff you even worked on? Or are you simply just looking at this dieting approach and saying, nope, not for me, and you anticipate all these negative things along with dieting that don't necessarily have to be true.
Exactly. And that is where that idea of, this doesn't work, why even try? And I said in the beginning, you're creating your own victim narrative. You literally are.
Yeah.
If somebody's telling you over and over again, Jill, you're never going to be able to change it. You're never going to be able to change this. Why even try this? Why the fuck would you? You just wouldn't. And then you would always look at it in this negative connotation. Now, do I think that there are negative messages out there? Yes. Do I think that overall we can change some of the messaging? Yes. But do I think that, again, it's the fault of certain things like a calorie deficit, like trying to be a healthier person? No, that should never be something that people are shying away from. And you do need to work on your relationship with food. You do need to work on your habits. You do need to work on your mindset. But that doesn't mean that you get to ignore all these other health issues that you might be having.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean you don't have to put yourself in a position to make those changes to begin with.
Exactly.
You're ignoring the biggest issue you're having if you're having all those negative health issues.
And let's just get this out of the way right now. And I know that we did a podcast on health at every size. Me and Karina did that a few months ago.
Yeah.
And this notion, this is what's so hard about this cultural messaging now, and this narrative that's being pushed. When people in science talk about, hey, you're obese, hey, you're overweight, hey, you have too much body fat. This is not an attack on a person. This is not an attack on a character or your worth or fat phobia. This is none of that. This is medically, you are unhealthy. Yeah. Now, are there people who are overweight who are metabolically healthy? Yes, I am not saying that that is not true. But the vast majority of people who are overweight and particularly obese, meaning they have too much body fat and too little muscle, and they're not active, and they eat like shit, they are not going to be healthy people. And you cannot convince me otherwise, because we can look at all of the diseases that are influenced by this. Yeah. You are not healthy if you have unmanaged type 2 diabetes. You're not healthy if you have heart disease and metabolic syndrome and all these things. This is not up for debate.
You're on a multitude of medications.
Yeah, you're on 5 medicines.
You can't function day to day like an average person who needs to be active, or if you can't do, regular things in a day just because of your body weight, if you're having joint issues, all these things are because of, maybe being overweight or obese. And these are just terms to use to define where you're at.
Yes.
These are not anything to, insult people, which a lot of people do take it that way. It's not an insult or anything. It's just a term to define the state you're in.
There has to be a working definition, right? And obesity means that you have too much body fat and it's creating these issues, right? And then, again, you could go, oh, well, the BMI chart's wrong. Okay, sure, I'll give it to you. Maybe it is, right? Population level, I think it does a decent job because, again, most people are not incredibly muscular.
No, if we're talking about the athletic population, that's a different story.
Different story. And they're probably more metabolically healthy. They might have other issues. I'm not saying they don't, right? Yeah. They do. But the problem, I think, has become now people think or equate, they're trying to equate, oh, well, I don't want to, the narrative, I don't want to look this certain way. If you have abs, that you're healthy. No. We're not saying that either. First of all, most people who have abs actually aren't healthy. Newsflash. The people who look the leanest and the best in shape are actually now in a different unhealthy position, but a completely different unhealthy position, right?
Yeah.
Being underweight has its own risks. Being too little body fat has its own risks. But there is no way that we can ignore the detriment to a person and their body as a whole if they have too much body fat and too little muscle. It is undeniable. So I think that the idea behind all this needs to be like, we need to be able to have these conversations without people getting upset over that. It's not an attack on you or your worth or your character. It is literally just a fact. And anybody who's been through a situation to where they're in a unhealthy body fat level, which I think you could probably speak to this too, you feel so much better when your body is in a healthy place. Again, not a state, we're not talking about abs and striated, no. We're talking about at a healthy body weight. You're what, 125-ish right now?
I'm like 126, 127.
Yeah, okay. Between 125, 130, right? That's where you're at. Where were you when you were overweight?
180 at my max.
And you're how tall?
I'm like 5'2".
Yeah.
So that's definitely, put me in the overweight category. For sure. And I can tell you now, didn't really feel that good to be there. Physically and also just mentally for, my confidence levels, I did not feel good at all. And I can even tell you, like, being in the 150 range, it still didn't feel right for me. Everyone's experience is going to be different. Of course, everyone's confidence levels are going to be different. But you can literally feel, like, when things just aren't feeling good, internally. And also just the way you move, through the day. Things just feel better, things feel lighter, things feel so much easier on me not being at that weight anymore. And just speaking for someone, I've never been obese, obviously, but you cannot tell me that someone isn't having negative health issues or negative, negative experiences just from being at the weight that they are. You're going to have some issues with, your health to some extent, and just getting through the day or like moving throughout the day, it's going to be harder on you.
Much harder.
And I truly believe that, like, you can be confident, you can, make it work for you, but you can't ignore like the health implications that being at those overweight or obese does to you.
And I think that's where this has gotten combined, unfortunately. People are, confidence and your self-worth and how you feel about yourself is an inside job, right? I've been all different types of body compositions. I've worked with people at all different types of body composition. And I know for a fact that it matters more about how you feel about yourself on the inside, right? Outside of what you physically look like. We are not trying to say that that is not true. But what cannot be ignored with this whole conversation is that, again, if you are overweight, and particularly if you are obese, again, remember, too much body fat, too little muscle mass, you have this unideal, like suboptimal body composition, you're setting yourself up for a lot of these health risks. And it will only get worse the older that you get. You know, obviously you recognized fairly young that you wanted to do that, but imagine if you didn't, how much farther would you have been then?
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And that's the way I think about it all the time, especially as the new year comes around. You know, people like to put these things off, but it's like, hey, imagine if you just started when this came to your mind in the first place, how farther along you'd be.
Yes.
And I've been on the other side of it where, you know, I was in that place where maybe I ignored the inner work at the start. You know, I thought like, oh, if I'm just a different size, I'll feel better. And I realized real quick that like, no, there's a lot of internal things I need to work on in order to, you know, feel more confident and build up my self-esteem. So I've been on that side of things too, where, oh, you know, the size you are at doesn't necessarily mean you'll be happier.
Yes.
So, you know, I've gone through that too, where, you know, I had to do the inner work to really help with my self-confidence. So it's not saying that like, oh, you know what, just lose weight,
be more confident.
Yeah,
no.
lose weight, you'll be happier, everything will be better. No, you still have to do the inner work, but it does help along the process and help you realize like, hey, I'm doing things that help me feel good. I'm doing things that help me feel better about myself, and that adds up over time.
And I think that's really the key, is when you start doing things that, you know, you tell yourself, I'm going to do this, and you follow through, that builds confidence.
Yeah, exactly.
If you say, hey, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to go for a walk, that builds inner confidence. You can tell yourself all you want.
Like, hey, I can do this.
Exactly. You have to do this through action. Part of it is your thoughts, but thoughts are not enough. You have to have actions as well. And we all know when we're not in alignment with that. You know, we all know when we're kind of just getting by. We all know when we start getting kind of lazy with what we want to do, and I'll just set that off, or I'll just hit the snooze, or I'll just, right? And sometimes we all got to go through periods of that too. And I totally appreciate that. I go through those things myself. Not trying to say like I'm just like disciplined bunny. Like, no. But again, you have to hold. The more that you
hold yourself accountable, the more that you hold yourself to those promises you make, you're going to build up your confidence, and it's like self-efficacy. You know, you see that you're able to do it, and then that just helps you accomplish these things more.
And then you do another
discipline.
thing.
You know, it's a skill like anything else. You're doing what you set out to do, and that feels good. And it helps you continue with those good habits.
Yes, and that is honestly the most important work that we do with clients. It's so hard to physically see, but I mean, I can just read it through an update, you know what I mean? Or I can, read it through a conversation or whatever. You know, somebody gets in the front, like, oh my gosh, it's completely changed. And it's just, that is the most amazing thing that can come out of this. And that's where working on your habits and working on your mindset is the key to all of this. So yes, diets work, but also yes, diets don't work if you don't have the right habits around them.
Yeah.
So the one, there's a lot of points, and we could probably make another whole podcast on this too. But as far as like I said, I asked that question. What are some of the holes with like the whole, weight loss in the industry, and then just science misconceptions in general. And one of the a recurring theme was rebounds and sustainability, right? And this is just very common, particularly when people have a lot of weight to lose. Yeah. They're going to fluctuate, understandably, more. And if your body was used to, again, arbitrary numbers, used to being 200 pounds, and then you got it down to 180, that's going to be a little bit easier to maintain than if you go from 200 to 150, right? Then your body's going to be like, whoa, we just had this huge change. I want to go back to where I was. This is pretty uncomfortable. Not saying that 180 won't be uncomfortable for a little while, but it'll be a little bit easier for your body to handle. So typically what we recommend for most people to avoid going through these harsher rebounds is, you start and then you diet a little bit, and then you kind of pause, maybe you
take a break.
Whether it's a diet break or you add calories back, then you kind of drop again, and then you kind of keep doing this like stepwise pattern where you're dropping things over time. And then now maybe you do get to 150, which is a healthy body weight and a body composition for you, but you maybe did it over 2 years, and now you're actually able to sustain that 150 instead of going from 200 to 150 in 3 months. Because guess what? You're certainly going to go back to 200. And to speak to yo-yo dieting, you might go to 210. And then it might be even harder to get that off, because why? The metabolic adaptations. And you lost the muscle mass and your hormones are all jacked up, right? So the more that you do that, the worse off that it is and the harder it is. So really, to speak to rebounds and sustainability, taking things in this kind of really slow stepwise pattern of calorie deficit, reverse diet, get your calories back up, and kind of go through these phases. It might take a little bit longer, but so much better.
Is it worth it?
Yes.
Though? And just to speak on that a little bit more, it's like, it's going to take longer, And I feel like I talk about this a lot with my clients, is just like, just being patient with the process. And for someone in that position where, they're overweight or obese and they're saying diets don't work, they may feel like, well, why bother? I'm so far away. And yeah, maybe you have a point, but also, you're not going to get there unless you start. And if you start now, yeah, it's going to take a while, but over time you're going to start seeing those changes. You're going to start feeling better, and then that, like we talked about with confidence, that's going to help you continue. So if you don't start and you're just stuck in that place where it's like, well, why bother? I'm already too far away. That's no place you want to stay in.
No. And even though it might seem like it takes longer, it actually doesn't. Because say you dedicate 2 or 3 years to getting to a body composition that you actually are healthy at and can maintain, that's going to be far less time than the yo-yo dieting that you might have done. That we work with those clients who, I've been doing this for 10 or 15 years, 20 years. You're like, all right, well, we got some work cut out for us. We can do it, but it's definitely going to take some time. And think about if you had done that in, like I said, those 3 years, like just, again, an arbitrary number.
And then you're saving yourself from even more years of yo-yo dieting.
Exactly.
So while it is a long process and it's going to take some time and patience to, go through those cycles of dieting, reverse dieting, maintaining, dieting again, it's going to save you a lot more time in the long run.
100%. And one of the other things that is so, I think, misconstrued, and the question was posed at the, in air quotes, calorie deficit narrative, when people really don't even know what their maintenance is. So, oftentimes the science community their answer is, we'll just be in a calorie deficit and you'll be losing weight, which for most of the time is accurate. Obviously there's nuance here, clearly, but most people, a lot of people, don't even actually know where their maintenance is, right? Most people haven't even been consistent with a diet long enough to actually know that. And this doesn't go for just people who are new to this. This goes for people who, even, let's say, competitors, right? You could look at somebody who's been on stage at a high-level physique competitor, but they've been going back and forth with contest prep rebound. They don't know what their actual maintenance is. They don't even know where their body wants to settle weight-wise, right? And that's going to take some time too to figure out. So before you can even attempt, I guess, to
put yourself in a deficit, that word doesn't mean anything to you unless you actually know what you're eating to begin with. So it's like, just go in a calorie deficit. Okay, what's that?
Okay, first of all, what is that? How much is it?
For me?
What does it look like? And also the composition of that calorie deficit, right? We always hear about, the 1,200 calorie diet, right? Or I'm eating about 1,000 calories. 1,000 calories of carbs and fats is very different than 1,000 calories with a gram of protein per pound, right?
Yes.
Whole different discussion.
So it looks a lot different.
Are we just having protein at dinner, or are we having 4 protein servings a day, which is now accounting for a large portion of those calories?
Yeah, and we're not talking about protein like, I have nuts, there's a little bit of protein. No, we're talking about actual protein.
A handful of pistachios is not protein.
No.
It could maybe add to your protein targets, but we're talking
but
about.
It's definitely not what I would consider a protein source.
No, obviously.
Please.
Jillian just eats protein bars, guys. Super happy. I just called her out. Protein bars and Advil is Jill's diet.
That's the next podcast. Just picking apart my diet. It's fine.
No, but really, just kidding. No, you've gotten much better.
Yes.
There was a period where you were eating a lot of protein.
Yeah, I was just like, you know what?
I get it. They are really convenient. I mean, when I come to the office,
they're super convenient.
I bring them, because it's like I'm busy and I don't necessarily.
I like them as a snack if I don't feel like having a meal now.
Exactly.
I more so for the fact that I have the room for it, but if I don't have the room for it, I'm not gonna buy it.
But understanding, okay, what is actually my maintenance? What is a calorie balance for me? And just jumping blindly into that isn't necessarily a good idea either. Now, could I roughly look at somebody and be like, this is probably how much you should be eating? I could just, take a guess, because we've been doing this for a long time, and give a pretty educated answer. Yes. But does that mean that it is necessarily the best answer? No, right? So why would you rush that process? If we've already just talked about all this stuff where it's like, let's not rush this, why would we put ourselves in that situation where we're just kind of blindly hoping that something works?
Blindly picking a target and going with it.
It might be right, but it could be wrong. So why don't we do a little bit of the background work first, which again is going to now lay the habits necessary to have a successful diet and a successful post diet.
Like, laying the foundation and then the stuff you build on top of it will actually stick.
Exactly. Wow. You don't
my
just.
God, analogy.
I'm like, wow, construction analogies. We're like, put the roof on somewhere.
Yeah. Maybe we start with
It's
the
like a
roof
window here.
and then just go and wing it for the rest of it. Everything falls apart on top of you, and
This is fine. And the, so to kind of round this out, I think that, we touched on a lot of really good points, and I really just want to kind of hammer home the idea that your mindset around all of this really is the determining factor for how successful you are.
yeah.
Your mindset about, is this going to work? Is this not? I mean, literally the mindset research is so crazy.
Yeah.
It continues to blow me away how effective our mind is in creating these scenarios, like good or bad, right?
Yeah.
It's
crazy because if you believe that you can't do something, or you can't be that person that loses a bunch of weight, you will never get to the point where you can actually start that. You have to believe, oh my God, so cheesy, believe in yourself, but you have to believe that you can be that person to lose all this weight. You can be that person to make all these lifestyle changes. If it doesn't start internally, you can try the quick fixes, but those aren't going to last long term.
Yeah, and that's where, again, that kind of, you're creating this own self-fulfilling victim narrative is literally true. If you're always, I'm stupid, I'm never going to, succeed in school, or if I can't stick to my diet, so it must be the diet, or I'm such a failure. No, that's not right. We need to figure out, how can you stick to this? What do we need to change? What habits do you need to create? What habits do you need to take away? How long is realistic? So there's so many different facets to this that I think that, these quick blurbs of intentional weight loss doesn't work, which is being promoted more and more, is actually really damaging.
It's so saturated right now on Instagram specifically. I keep coming across it on my Explore page, and I'm just banging my head into the table no, that's not it.
No, because it's taking the worst parts of something and saying that is the truth.
That this is the definition of how dieting goes, when it's very far from the truth.
Are there a handful of people who develop eating disorders and disordered eating from diets? Hey, I was somebody who had an eating disorder for many years, so I understand this. I've worked with many people who have had these issues. It is something that is real. But does everybody develop those disorders from a diet? No. The same way that not everybody, people can eat the same food and have different body compositions. The same way that people can go to the same classes in school and have different GPAs, right? It doesn't mean that everybody's gonna have the same response. So when we're taking this one particular response, diets are bad, diets are failing, diets are creating eating disorders. They could, but they don't necessarily always do that.
Yeah, they're taking a personal experience and making that the definition.
And why did that not work? Because you didn't have the right mindset, you didn't have the right habits, and you didn't
work on your relationship with food.
Yeah, if you have a bad relationship with food and you diet, it's not going to be good.
Yeah, if you're constantly yo-yo dieting, obviously you're going to view diets a certain way.
Yes. So I think we just need to kind of detach from that emotional argument, which really it's an emotional argument, is looking at, diets or weight loss in that way and say, okay, what is a better sustainable method and actual, habits that we can build around this to make these successful? Because that's what we want for every client. We want them to be able to successfully maintain a healthy body composition.
Yeah.
Remember, healthy does not mean abs for everybody. Some people have abs and they're healthy. Other people can literally be so lean and barely even see abs. I just use that as an example because a lot of people look at that as kind of a benchmark.
Yeah,
it's the benchmark that everybody uses in their mind. You know what I mean? But it's not an accurate benchmark, and it's certainly not a health benchmark.
Definitely not a marker of health or anything like that.
Not at all.
Some people have them, some people don't.
And not even body comp. Some people literally can be super lean, and if they don't even have developed abs, you're not even going to see them.
Yeah. There are some people who can be super lean, not even have ab definition.
And some people who are higher body fat and have abs.
Yeah. Some people at a higher body fat can still see some lines. So it's really just variable on the individual at that point.
Yeah. So we are just again using that as an example to say, weight loss does work. It can also not work depending on the methods that you use, and we need to just change this conversation and be very emotionally detached from it, because when we get emotional and reactive, it's never a good thing. And that's when you start getting these personal accounts, and that's when you start getting all of these negative feelings and emotions around it, and that's not useful for anybody.
You don't want to surround yourself with people who are like in that same camp of like, I just don't work. Like, you need to step back and look at, hey, what did I do? What did I experience? And what is not working here? You know, what is different from me and someone else who did do this and they're successful and happy and sustaining it. I think you need that objective view of what you're doing.
Yeah, the ability to detach is incredibly important with everything, but especially with our emotions, and particularly when it's emotions about us and our capabilities. So I really wanted to make this episode. I think this was hopefully really insightful for you guys. So if you have any questions, please let us know. Feel free to reach out. We're always open to further discussion, particularly on here. You know, so if there's anything else you guys feel like we missed, we would love to address it in another podcast.
Yeah, I feel like we can go on for this.
I know there's so many different ways and like rabbit holes that we could go through. So
definitely,
I'm all about it. And this is what I nerd out about, because this is literally the foundation of what we do as coaches. It's not just about, you know, oh hey, can you lose weight?
Oh yeah, just like follow the plan. Like, it's not just about that. There's a lot of stuff on the back end that you need to work with and tinker with.
So many things, and that is, like I said, the foundation of what we do as a team. So we nerd out about this. So any other questions or topics you want us to dive into, please let us know. You can do that. You can visit the site, which is brand new and fabulous.
So fresh, so clean.
I know, I just had to throw that in there. I'm so happy with it. So you can send us a contact email. You can look through the articles, the other podcasts that we have on there, and then of course you can apply for coaching if you're interested as well.
Everything is there, and it looks really nice.
I know. It really does.
Yeah, it does.
I'm so proud of it. So proud of it. So, all right. Thank you guys, and we will catch you next week.
Bye.